Hi, I'm Paul Feig, director of Ghostbusters. Answer the call, and you are listening to Following the Nerd.
Let's start, Paul, away at the start. I mean, the big announcement at the time for Ghostbusters for their 30th anniversary, I believe it was that we were getting a new Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters 3 was coming. The internet was really, really excited, and I know that you said this yourself, that very quickly the tide seemed to turn against you.
Well, yeah, I mean, they had been trying to make Ghostbusters 3, the actual Ghostbusters 3 for a while, as I'm sure you guys know. Mm-hmm. And I was contacted back when I was making Spy by Ivan, who had a script that actually friends of mine wrote. These two writers, Lee and Gene. I thought there was a lot of really fun stuff in it. But, I knew that Bill didn't want to do it. And so it was just kind of like, boy, there's just a lot of obstacles against this, because look, there's nothing I would have loved more than a full-on Ghostbusters reunion 2. That to me was always the one that I know everybody was kind of looking forward to, and all the fans were hoping was going to happen. But it just, what everybody wanted couldn't happen anymore. You know what I mean? Because basically 2 of the Ghostbusters were not going to be in it, and obviously all 4 Ghostbusters are as important as each other, but to not have Bill and Harold that's a pretty big hit. Again, to take away from the original thing. So it was like 6 months later, I was in post on Spy, and Amy Pascal kind of contacted me and was like, why doesn't anybody want to do this? We went out to lunch, and I sat with her for an hour and kind of unspooled all the reasons why you shouldn't touch Ghostbusters, and just because it's such comedy canon, and just taking out those guys and all that, and just the memory of it, and there's so many things attached to it, but left that lunch going like, God, but Ghostbusters is sitting there, and nobody wants to touch it, and it's such a great franchise. And I just love, I'm a super fan of the original Ghostbusters. I saw it opening weekend when I was in film school. And I remember just thinking like, my God, what a great idea. Funny, it goes all the way back to Abbott and Costello, which I always thought was such a funny thing, to have funny people in danger. It's a recipe for comedy gold. And so it really just stuck with me. And that's when I, kind of banged it around in my head and went, oh, wait, if I could, I work with all these funny women, if I could make it, if I could cast all the funny women I know, that would kind of take it away from the original Ghostbusters. It'd take the idea, but it wouldn't be competing with the original Ghostbusters, because I wouldn't be trying to assemble a team of guys who you'd be comparing the original Ghostbusters to. And so that, long story made longer, that was really the genesis of it, of just going like, I've got all these funny women. I love working with funny women. And here's a way to make it different. So, in my head, it wouldn't get compared to the original Ghostbusters, because it would just be a whole other thing.
Do you think it's possible to not ever have that comparison to the original Ghostbusters? Because that movie's called Ghostbusters, your version's called Ghostbusters, and both are about the same thing. So I think it's hard, no matter what you do or how you approach it, to not get that comparison.
Well, I 100% agree, but that's with hindsight. I see it now, but at that point I thought, oh, who wouldn't be excited that there's just going to be like a new kind of Ghostbusters on the screen? I was that naive in that way.
Do you think if things were to change and that conversation with Amy was to take place now, do you think you would have retooled the script somewhat so that, it would have picked up, like 25 years later? Or do you think in hindsight would you have changed that?
No, I wouldn't have, because I just didn't. I had no interest in. And look, this is me, because I'm the filmmaker who was allowed to take the property, and people can be upset about that, forever. And for me, it started the story off at a disadvantage of, if it's not the original Ghostbusters all going in and doing it, is it that exciting to watch them have to teach a new team how to do it? In somebody else's hands, sure, it could have been fantastic. In my hands, the guy who was asked to do it, no, it would not have been good. It would just been, because we wrote it, and that's what those scripts were. The ones that I read by very talented, funny writers, really good stuff. But it was always like, we were like, oh, okay. It never, it always kind of, for me, kind of crapped out about halfway through.
From the fans' perspective and from the general audience's perspective, they've seen ghosts attack New York 3 times now total. So, like, I think something that the fan base anyway would have liked to have seen, from what I've seen online, and trust me, there's a lot of stuff online, but like the positive stuff has said, like, well, what would Ghostbusters California look like? What would Ghostbusters Nebraska look like? Or something just still within the same universe that still allows the characters of Venkman and Stans and Spengler to exist, but it's taking place somewhere completely new.
When Katie and I were working on the script, we just realized there was some touchstones that we were trying to think, like, as fans, if we went and saw the reboot, what would we want in there, and what would we be bummed if it wasn't in there? And one of the top things was the firehouse. And so that's why we were like, let's keep it in New York, just because there's enough iconic stuff that we can sort of have fun with. We really wanted to have the firehouse in there, because to us, we thought it was fun that they actually are looking for a headquarters. They get to the firehouse, and then they find out in today's New York they can't afford it, but then it becomes the thing that they get. But so when we realized we couldn't shoot in New York and had to shoot in Boston because of tax purposes, because the movie was going to be expensive, when we were scouting Boston, I kept thinking we should just set it in Boston, because when I did The Heat, that was originally written to take place in New York, but since we had to shoot it in Boston for the same tax reasons, when we got there and we're scouting it, the script was all finished, I was like, Boston's such a cool city, and the people are so fun, and we can have fun with the accents and the characters and all that. Let's switch it to Boston. Same thing with Spy. Spy was supposed to take place mostly in Paris in the whole second half of the movie, but when we got to Budapest, where we had to shoot once again for tax reasons, because that rules all of production in Hollywood these days. I was like, Budapest is such a beautiful city. Let's set it here. And so I did. And so going into Ghostbusters is like, I've had such success for the last 2 movies placing it in the city that we're in, that let's do it in Boston. But it just, we just loved the idea of having this final showdown take place in Times Square, which is so world famous and known, and I was like, well, maybe it takes place in Fenway Park, but it just felt like for a worldwide audience, everybody knows Times Square, and we get to have the bonus of having the firehouse and all that. And so, so we kept it in New York. And was that a good decision? I stand by it, because I love that we had our final showdown in New York City. And when we were in Boston scouting, we found firehouses that we were going to fake, but for some reason that almost felt like, okay, well, we got to, it's not the real firehouse. Should we change all that? And so it just, at the end of the day, again, creative decision. The movie was mine to make. We decided to go with the New York, and I stand by it. But I completely understand why some people were put off by it. That said, I think if we didn't set it in New York, you would have heard just as many people upset that we didn't put it in New York. So it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole sometimes with the people on the internet, because I think some people are just going to get upset no matter what we did.
Whenever the movie, Paul, was first announced, along with the cast and everything else, I remember the night it was announced on Twitter. It was because I know you said at the time everybody wanted Ghostbusters 3, but the news sort of initially came out, Ghostbusters 3 was coming out, and within a couple of hours it was announced it was going to be a reboot, and the cast was going to be all the ladies and everything else. And I saw the tide. You could see the tide turning on Twitter. It was like, oh my God, this is amazing, to what the hell, and it happened in a heartbeat. We would never for a second deny that there aren't sexists and racists out there. Of course there is. The world's full of idiots. But do you take on board that a lot of the fans were really more just annoyed that they felt it was a franchise that should have been continued rather than restarted, and that it could have been. Not so much that the film wasn't, I'm not by any means attacking the movie itself, but that the whole situation could have been handled better.
Yeah, I put out that tweet, and if you remember the wording of the tweet, it was basically, I'm going to reboot Ghostbusters with an all-female cast, all-female cast of hilarious ladies. That's who I'm going to call. I believe that's exactly what I wrote. And the first wave, for a day here, because I announced it probably in the morning, California time, was just absolute euphoria. I mean, I was, and especially from a lot of women, but a lot of people, but people just, read it, they understood it. It said reboot with women. So they got that. very, very happy. I went to bed that night like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing, and up to this point in my career, because of Freaks and Geeks and because of Bridesmaids and because of The Heat and Spy, which people liked. Actually, Spy hadn't come out yet, but The Heat people liked. I had this really lovely relationship with the internet. I did not have hardly any trolls, hardly any at all, because, my whole brand is, I'm a nerd and I, and so we were kind of like against the bullies and we were sort of safe from bullies, and that was our place. And so it was a very harmonious. So I went into this going like, oh, cool. What I announce, people just get really happy about, because my motivations are always pure in what I'm doing. It's not, I did not go like, hey, how can I upset everybody? I'm going to get a bunch of ladies, or as lots of people say, I'm such an SJW and I have such an agenda. It's like the only agenda I had is the funniest people I work with are women, and that's who I find funny. And those are who I like. And I thought this is a way to, again, like I said earlier, keep it away from, stronger comparisons with the original cast. So go to bed that night. All joy, all happiness. I'm like, okay, this is great. The internet still likes me. Get up the next morning and suddenly my inbox is filled. Yes, I 100% agree, and I've said this a million times in interviews. There are a lot of people who have very legitimate complaints that it was not a sequel, that it was a reboot, all that. And I heard from those people and I acknowledge those people and I completely understand it and I get it. And I apologize to them that they didn't get what they, were hoping for out of this. And I put no blame on them whatsoever, because they are just fans who have an opinion. And I've been a long, lifelong member of the geek community and sci-fi community and all that. So I completely get it. But my Twitter feed was filled with about 80 to 90% misogynistic, horrendous, awful, sexist, violent, utter, ugly, name-calling, violent misogyny. And so what happens is, in every interview I do, I say that, I give my whole preamble about all the people contacted me and said, had legitimate fan-based issues with stuff, and I completely hear them, and I, and tried to make them happy with what we did with the movie too. But all they ever focus on is that I said everybody who's against a Ghostbusters reboot is a misogynist, and I've never in my life said that, never. But again, those people are not Ghostbusters fans. I know Ghostbusters. I've hung with so many ghost heads and so many of their communities, and they are the most wonderful people, and I've met with people, and when I've done comic cons and comic conventions, I've had other fans come up to me and directly say, like, look, I was one of the people that was against your movie, here's why, and we've had the greatest conversations about it, just like you guys and I are right now. Mm-hmm. And it's always been in service of, like, we love the franchise, we wish you hadn't done this, or we wish we would have had that. I'm like, cool, I get that, here's why I did that, here's why I did this. These people who came at me were a bunch of dudes who I think honestly hadn't thought about Ghostbusters in years, weren't necessarily super fans, were just guys who were, kind of had, I think, raided the fan community of comics and all that, who discovered it later on, or maybe they were early adopters. I don't know, but these are, look, I'm a lifelong nerd and a lifelong geek. We all got into this stuff because we had bullies and we felt powerless, and we were being persecuted by various tough guys and bullies and all this stuff. And sci-fi and comic books and all this stuff and fantasy was always our escape to go, oh my God, like there's some world where I know that I would rule, that's away from this perpetual terrible high school, way that life is with bullies and awful people and all that. And so that's why I look at these trolls, and I look at it the same thing with the guys who are going against Star Wars for racist reasons, and they don't like, that there's an Asian woman in one of the parts. That these are not fans. These are not fans. I'm sorry. I do not think these are hardcore fans. I think these are people that, to them, it's this kind of symbolic of other things that they don't want in happening in their worlds and in their